Usually when we talk about building a business, there's this expectation of precision. Like, it feels almost like architecture.
Right, yeah, like drawing up blueprints.
Exactly. You lay a solid foundation, you put up the drywall, you physically see the structure rising, and at the end of the day, the contractor just points at the building and says, there it is.
It's a very comforting illusion, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, we naturally gravitate toward things that are tangible. We like the elements of business that we can just quantify in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, like inventory costs or profit margin.
Exactly. Square footage. The hard numbers.
But then you step out of the spreadsheet and into the world of brand identity, and specifically verbal strategy, and suddenly that architectural blueprint is it's entirely useless.
Completely useless, yeah.
You're standing in this linguistic and emotional landscape that is, honestly, it's incredibly murky. Like, you cannot put an X-ray on a brand's voice.
No, you really can't.
You can't just put a tape measure around a customer's emotional connection to your company.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. But, and this is the fascinating part, looking at the data we have, this intangible, totally unmeasurable essence is arguably the single most valuable asset a company will ever own.
Wait, really? More than the product itself?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. A physical product can be reverse engineered by a competitor in a matter of weeks.
Right. Yeah, someone in another country just makes it cheaper.
Exactly. But a genuinely resonant brand voice, a real emotional connection that is almost impossible to replicate.
And I feel like that tension, between the murky and the essential, that's exactly what we're diving into today. So, welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive designed specifically for you, the listener.
That's a great one today.
Our mission today is highly practical, really actionable, and maybe just a little bit mind-bending. We are going to map out how to create a unique, powerful, and deeply authentic brand voice for your small business. And we have just an incredible stack of source material to help us navigate this.
Yeah, the diversity of the sources today is what makes this so fascinating, Tim. I mean, we were pulling from comprehensive brand strategy workbooks.
Which are super dense.
Very dense. But also university lesson plans that are focused specifically on building brand kits.
Right.
Plus deep dive articles breaking down the actual literal neuroscience of brand naming.
That part is wild.
It really is. And we also have the very dry but necessary federal trademarking guidelines from the USPTO and several really compelling case studies on emotional branding and verbal identity.
And the central premise running through every single one of these documents is that a brand is so much more than a logo.
Oh, yeah. A logo is just a symbol on a page.
Exactly. A brand is a living conversation. So over the course of this deep dive, we're going to explore how to scientifically engineer a brand name using actual brain anatomy.
Which sounds like sci-fi, but it's real.
Right. And how to infuse that name with genuine emotion, how to listen to the absolute chaos of social media chatter to shape your personality.
It's a lot of chatter.
It is. Plus, how to use ancient narrative models to tell a story. And finally, how to ensure your company's internal culture actually matches the external promises you are making to the world.
But, before we get too far into the weeds here, I think it's important to just kind of set a reassuring tone for the listener.
Yeah, good idea.
Because when we start throwing around phrases like the neuroscience of linguistic processing or, federal trademark design codes, it can sound incredibly intimidating.
Oh, for sure. If you're a small business owner and you're currently wearing 5 different hats.
You're doing the accounting, the shipping.
Exactly. The idea of conducting text analytics might sound like a luxury that's only reserved for multinational corporations.
Right. But the science we're going to unpack today is entirely accessible. I mean, their principles are deep, yes, but the application does not require $1 million ad budget.
And that is the ultimate goal here. You can consider this your ultimate toolkit for building an identity. And I think the most surprising takeaway for me as I was reading through these sources is just how psychological branding actually is.
Oh, it's pure psychology.
Right. It's basically about understanding human nature at a biological level. So before we can even begin to construct a complex brand story or figure out a conversational tone, we need a starting point, an anchor.
The name.
The name. According to the neuroscience literature in our stack, a brand's voice actually begins with the literal physical sound it makes inside a consumer's mind.
The neuroscience of sound is just a remarkable field. I mean, at the very center of brand name memorability is this phenomenon known as linguistic processing.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, to understand it, we have to recognize a fundamental truth about human biology, which is our brains are incredibly efficient.
Which is really just a polite way of saying they're lazy, right?
Yeah. That is exactly what it means. The brain constantly seeks the path of least resistance. It wants to recognize patterns, make snap associations, and extract meaning while burning the absolute minimal amount of caloric energy possible.
So if a word is difficult to pronounce or it just requires too much cognitive effort to decipher,
The brain just discards it.
just tosses it out.
Yeah, it just flat out refuses to encode it. That's the biological reality.
Wow.
When a consumer encounters a new brand name, factors like phonetic structure, how the name physically sounds, the syllable count, all of that dictates whether that name is remembered or just instantly forgotten.
Because it's literally too much work to remember it.
Exactly. Studies in cognitive psychology demonstrate this over and over again. Words with an easy pronunciation and a predictable rhythmic flow simply stick better in our neural pathways.
Okay, the sources give a really fascinating example of this regarding consonant and vowel structures. They pointed to the water brand, Dasani.
Ah, yes. A perfect case study in phonetic engineering.
Because when you break Dasani down, it uses the most basic consonant-vowel pattern possible, right? Dasani.
Consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel.
Yeah. And the article points out that this specific structure, it's not an accident.
Not at all.
It intentionally mirrors how babies first learn language. It's the absolute foundational basis of human speech development.
Which is why it's universally easy to pronounce, virtually regardless of what your native language happens to be. You're tapping into a deeply ingrained, pre-conscious linguistic pattern.
That is so wild to me. Like, they engineered a water brand to sound like baby talk, basically.
But sophisticated baby talk.
That.
And the science goes much deeper than just making a word easy to articulate. There's an entire subfield of linguistics discussed in the sources called sound symbolism.
Right, sound symbolism.
Yeah. This is the study of the audible properties of a name, like how a sequence of letters sounds to our ears,
Yeah.
entirely independent of any actual semantic meaning.
So divorcing the definition of the word from just the physical sound of the word.
Exactly. It starts with the physical mechanics of speech, how air is pushed through your vocal cords, over your tongue, and out of your mouth.
This is the part that completely blew my mind. Because different sounds, when forced out of the mouth in certain ways, subconsciously signal abstract concepts.
They do.
Like the sound itself makes a name feel bigger or faster or heavier or more relaxing.
Right. So let's look at how this plays out in the real world. Think about the automotive industry.
Okay.
When a car manufacturer is designing a sports car, they are trying to sell a specific feeling. Energy, speed, dependable action, aggression.
Right, you don't want a relaxing sports car.
Exactly. And the data shows they consistently gravitate towards specific letters to achieve this. The letters J, P, S, H, K, and V.
Jaguar, Corvette.
There you go.
Right there, you can actually feel the difference. Like when you say Jaguar or Corvette, the air doesn't just flow out. It's forced out in these sharp, active bursts.
Linguists call those sounds fricatives and plosives.
Fricatives and plosives, okay?
Yeah. The physical act of stopping the airflow and releasing it suddenly creates a micro-sensation of action and liveliness in the speaker's mouth and in the listener's ear.
Wow.
Now, contrast those sharp active bursts with a completely different sector, like the hospitality industry or the cosmetics industry. They aren't selling speed or aggression.
Definitely not. They're selling comfort, luxury, relaxation, like a sense of being taken care of.
Right. And because of that goal, the highest-ranking hotel chains and cosmetics brands in the world show a massive statistical preference for gentle, sonorous sounds.
Sonorous sound.
Yeah. They rely heavily on the letters M, H, W, L, R, and N.
Marriott, Hilton, L'Oreal.
Say those names aloud and notice what happens to your breath. There are no sharp stops. The air flows smoothly and continuously.
Marriott,
Oh, yeah.
Hilton, yeah, it's a soft murmur.
Exactly. The corporations behind these brands aren't just picking names out of a hat because they look nice on a letterhead. They're literally engineering the airflow out of your mouth to induce a subconscious feeling of relaxation.
It's incredible to think that the physical mechanics of speaking a word dictate our emotional response to the product before we even know what the product does.
It's powerful stuff.
And the research notes that these sound symbolism properties hold up surprisingly well across different languages and cultures, too. Like, it's a universal human response to auditory stimuli.
Yes, it crosses borders very effectively.
But, it isn't just about what we hear, because the sources also dive really heavily into visual spelling mechanics. How a name looks when it's typeset on a page or a screen matters just as much.
Well, the visual component triggers a completely different set of cognitive shortcuts. The article on naming mechanics highlighted a really fascinating study regarding the use of double consonants.
Right, and they use Google as the prime example here.
They did.
So comparing the actual spelling of Google, Google, with a phonetic alternative, like Gugle.
Phonetically, if you read them aloud, they are identical.
Yeah.
The sound symbolism remains exactly the same, but visually, the brain processes them very differently.
How so?
Well, the study revealed that when consumers see a product name with doubled consonants, they subconsciously assume the product itself has more options, more features, or more value.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. Because there are literally more of the same letter packed into the word, the lazy brain assumes the product itself is packed with more stuff.
That is the essence of a cognitive heuristic.
That is wild.
The brain equates visual density in the word with functional density in the product. It's an entirely illogical leap, but it happens reliably.
And it doesn't stop at double consonants either. The sources also explored the visual power of palindromes, words that are spelled the exact same way forwards and backwards.
Yes.
The examples they gave were Sonos, the audio company, and Kayak, the travel search engine.
Palindromes offer a very specific type of cognitive relief, visual symmetry.
Oh, right, because we like symmetry.
We love it. The human brain is hardwired to seek out symmetry in nature. We associate it with health, stability, and order. So when we see a brand name like Sonos or Kayak, that visual balance is incredibly pleasing.
It's soothing.
Exactly. It reduces the cognitive load required to process the word, making it exceptionally easy to encode into memory.
Which brings us to the actual biological process of encoding. The sources went deep into the brain anatomy involved when we encounter a new brand name.
They really did.
We're talking about transforming sensory information, like a sound or a visual shape, into permanent neural signals. And apparently, functional MRI scans show that truly memorable brand names cause a cascade of activity in very specific brain regions.
The sequence of that brain activity is crucial for a small business owner to understand. The first checkpoint is the amygdala.
The amygdala.
This is the brain's emotional processing center. When a brand name triggers curiosity, surprise, or a positive emotional resonance, the amygdala lights up. Its job is essentially to act as a filter.
So it's like a bouncer at a club.
Yes, perfect analogy. When it activates, it sends a signal to the rest of the brain saying, pay attention. This piece of information carries emotional weight.
So if the amygdala doesn't feel anything, like if the name is completely bland or generic,
the process stops right there.
Just dead in the water.
The brain drops the information to save energy. It never makes it past the front door.
Okay, but if the amygdala does fire, then what?
Then it passes the baton to the prefrontal cortex.
Right.
This is the region responsible for executive functions, conscious decision-making, and attentional control. A novel, standout name forces the prefrontal cortex to actively engage with it, to ponder it.
And then, assuming the amygdala felt something and the prefrontal cortex focused on it, what happens next?
Then, and only then, is the data passed to the hippocampus.
The memory center.
Exactly. The hippocampus is the region responsible for consolidating short-term data into long-term memory. That is the ultimate goal. You want your brand name stored in the hippocampus so that 3 weeks later, when the consumer is actually ready to buy, the name is waiting for them.
So applying this to the listener trying to build their business right now, picking a name is not just a casual brainstorming session over coffee.
No, not at all.
You are basically attempting to pick a biological lock.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You have to bypass the brain's inherent laziness, trigger an emotional response in the amygdala using sound symbolism or visual symmetry, hold the attention of the prefrontal cortex, and secure a permanent spot in the hippocampus.
It's a tall order.
It is, but let me push back on one aspect of this, because the sources say the brain craves semantic relevance, like it wants the name to make logical sense regarding the product.
Right.
Like the example of Amazon evoking massive scale and vastness, which perfectly aligns with a store that sells literally everything.
Sure.
But if that's true, how do completely invented, meaningless words succeed? The sources mentioned Swiffer and Pentium. Those aren't real words. They have zero semantic relevance.
It's a great question, and it highlights the sheer power of sound symbolism.
Okay.
Invented words succeed precisely because they abandon semantic meaning entirely. They rely 100% on the phonetic structures we just discussed. Think of a word with pre-existing meaning as a house that is already built.
Right, you're stuck with whatever it looks like.
You have to live with the associations that come with it. But by inventing a word, you are presenting the brain with an empty lot, a blank slate. You use the phonetic structure to dictate what kind of house the consumer builds on that lot.
So with Swiffer, the SU and the double F create a fast, sweeping light sensation.
Yes.
It literally sounds like a lightweight broom gliding across a floor.
Exactly. And Pentium. It utilizes the plosive P, suggesting power and impact, combined with a suffix agium that we culturally associate with elemental metals or scientific foundations.
Like titanium.
Right, so it sounds structural, robust, advanced. You bypass the need for a dictionary definition by making the name actually feel like the product.
You bypass the logical brain entirely and speak directly to the emotional sensory brain.
That makes perfect sense. But this is where our deep dive hits a rather massive wall of reality.
Ah, yes. The legal wall. Because you can spend months engineering the perfect symmetrical amygdala-activating palindrome. You can engineer the airflow perfectly. But none of that matters if the name infringes on someone else's trademark.
None of it.
The most phonetic name in the world is completely useless if a judge orders you to stop using it. And the USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, they do not care about your sound symbolism.
They absolutely do not.
Yeah.
This is where the creative journey crashes into very strict legal mechanics. Before a business owner even considers applying for a federal trademark, they must conduct a rigorous clearance search.
Right.
The goal is to determine if your engineered name is actually available for use in connection with specific goods or services. And the USPTO guidelines in our stack make it clear that this is a highly complex, layered process.
Yeah, the sources outline a specific search strategy, and honestly, looking at the syntax they use, it feels a bit like trying to navigate a wildly crowded party while looking for one specific person.
I like that analogy. Let's run with that.
Because otherwise, we're just going to drown in database jargon.
It is very dry. I think visualizing it as a party is a very helpful way to understand the database search.
Okay, so according to the guidelines, the absolute first step is the knockout search. The USPTO system allows you to search the combined mark field using a specific tag, which is CM:.
The CM tag, yes.
So if I have engineered the perfect name, let's say I want to call my company Bluebird, I would enter CM Bluebird. In the context of our crowded party, this knockout search is basically like standing by the front door and scanning the room to see if anyone is wearing your exact same outfit, down to the very last button.
Right.
And if you spot someone, you're knocked out, you have to go home and change.
It is the most fundamental filter. If an exact match exists for your goods and services, the search is over. But, and this is a big but, a clear knockout search often gives business owners a false sense of security.
How so?
Because trademark infringement is rarely about identical letter-for-letter matches. The legal standard is the likelihood of confusion. So, passing the knockout search simply means you are allowed to proceed to the next, much more difficult step. The expanded search.
Right. So back at the party, I've confirmed no one is wearing my exact outfit.
Safe so far.
But the expanded search means I now have to literally walk through the crowd and look for anyone wearing my colors or like a similar style of jacket, even if it isn't identical.
Exactly.
Because if we look too similar, the other guests might confuse us.
Applying that to the USPTO database, this is where you must use wildcards to catch partial matches. The system uses symbols like an asterisk or a /./ combination to search for variations.
So I can't just search Bluebird.
No. You have to search to see if someone has registered bluebirds, plural, or bluebirding, or a compound phrase like bluebird tech. If your proposed trademark includes multiple words, the guidelines state you must expand each individual word and search all possible combinations.
Wow. And the guidelines stress that you have to search alternative spellings and pronunciations, too, because another company might have registered BLUBURD.
Right, which sounds exactly the same.
And the USPTO recommends using regular expressions to catch these phonetic similarities, which actually ties right back to the neuroscience we were just talking about.
It does.
The trademark office knows that if a consumer says the two names out loud and they sound identical, the brain will confuse them regardless of how they're spelled.
The auditory confusion is a massive factor in trademark disputes. And this brings us to one of the most obscure yet totally vital parts of the clearance process, the design code search.
The design code.
Yes, if your brand identity includes a logo, a specific font treatment, or literally any visual element, you are required to search for conflicting visual marks as well.
Sticking with our party analogy, this would be like thoroughly checking to make sure no one else at the event has your specific, highly visible tattoo.
That is an excellent comparison. And to facilitate this, the USPTO maintains a massive, highly detailed design search code manual. Every conceivable visual element is assigned a 6-digit numerical code.
And the sources give a specific example of this, right? The code DC.050101.
Yes, that code is dedicated entirely to evergreens and other trees of triangular or conical shapes.
Just for pine trees.
Just for pine trees.
That's so granular.
Extremely granular. If your proposed logo incorporates a pine tree, you cannot simply type the word tree into the search bar. You must query DC.050101 to pull up every single registered trademark utilizing that specific shape.
And it gets even more complicated, right?
Yes, because you can use wildcards within the design codes too. Searching DC.0501 ? Will broaden the parameters to find all trademarks featuring any tree or bush design, regardless of its specific geometric shape.
It just sounds utterly exhausting.
It is a process.
And there's a crucial caveat the USPTO points out too. You must focus your efforts on live trademarks. A dead trademark, one that has been abandoned or canceled, cannot be cited by an examining attorney to stop your federal registration.
Though the sources do warn that dead marks might still cause common law issues depending on your specific state, so you can't totally ignore them.
Good to know. But the really tricky part, the aspect that seems to catch small businesses off guard constantly, is the definition of related goods.
Oh, this is a major stumbling block.
Yeah.
A business owner will do their search and they find a live trademark for Bluebird. But they think, well, that company sells Bluebird coffee mugs, and my company sells Bluebird roasted coffee beans. Mugs and beans are totally different classes of products, so I'm safe.
Right. I sell beans, they sell mugs, no problem. But the USPTO doesn't view it that way.
Not at all. The legal test is whether a consumer could mistakenly believe the two products originate from the same source. If the goods are sold together, used together, or advertised in similar channels, the USPTO considers them related.
And coffee beans and coffee mugs are deeply related.
Exactly. If the examining attorney decides there is a likelihood of confusion, they will issue an office action refusing your application. And it's vital to note, the USPTO does not refund your filing fees if you are rejected.
Ouch. That is a harsh financial reality for a startup. So let's look at what we've established so far. To build this foundation, you need a name that flows effortlessly off the tongue, engineered with specific fricatives or sonorous sounds that evoke the exact feeling of your industry.
Yeah.
It needs to be visually balanced, emotionally novel enough to wake up the amygdala, and legally cleared through a labyrinth of knockout searches, wildcard expansions, phonetic spelling checks, and numerical design code validations. That is a monumental task.
It is a gauntlet. There's no denying that.
But assuming you survive the gauntlet, assuming you secure the perfect, legally protected name, what actually happens next?
Right.
Because as much as we just analyze the name, a recognizable word is really just an empty label. It's a placeholder. It doesn't actually mean anything until you fill it with a reason to care. Which brings up the next major theme in our sources: empathy and emotional branding.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Once you've managed to get the brain's attention, how do you hold the heart?
The sources are unequivocal on this point. Human choices, even in strict business-to-business environments where people pretend to be purely rational, are rarely logical.
Right. Everyone thinks they make choices based on spreadsheets.
They don't. The data indicates that emotional cues drive approximately 70% of human decision-making.
70%. That means all the feature lists, the pricing matrices, the functional guarantees. That only accounts for 30% of why someone chooses your business over a competitor.
Exactly. And the financial return on investment for capturing that 70% is staggering. The emotional branding materials cite research from the Harvard Business Review, demonstrating that emotionally connected customers are more than twice as valuable as customers who are merely satisfied.
That is a massive distinction. We are so conditioned to strive for customer satisfaction. We think if the product works as advertised and the shipping is on time, we've won.
But this data says satisfaction is just the baseline. It isn't enough to build a resilient brand. Yeah, the product was fine. Does not generate loyalty.
Merely satisfied customers will just abandon you the moment a competitor offers a product that is slightly cheaper or slightly faster, right?
In a heartbeat. Emotionally connected customers behave entirely differently. They are heavily engaged, they have a significantly higher lifetime spend, and crucially, they act as vocal, unpaid advocates for your brand.
They build your brand equity organically through word of mouth.
Yes, to achieve that level of connection, the sources repeatedly emphasize a specific mandate. You must lead with empathy.
Okay, let's unpack what leading with empathy actually looks like in a business context, because it sounds like a buzzword.
It does, but true emotional branding requires a fundamental shift in perspective. It means moving away from a transactional mindset, which is, what can I sell you today?
Right.
And adopting a deeply relational mindset, which is, how can I understand your daily reality?
Yeah.
Empathy in branding is the rigorous process of understanding your target audience's hidden habits, their unspoken fears, their daily motivations, and the unmet needs they might not even be able to articulate themselves.
And the strategy workbooks discuss a dual approach to cementing this connection. They argue that you have to balance the emotional pull with rational justification. Emotions might drive 70% of the choice, but the logical 30% is required to reassure the buyer that they aren't making a foolish mistake.
We see this dual approach executed brilliantly by massive legacy brands. Take Patagonia, for example.
Oh, great example.
The emotional core of their brand is fierce environmental activism, a deep love for wild spaces, and a shared sense of moral purpose with their customers. That is the empathy, that's the heart. But they do not rely on emotion alone.
Right, because if the jackets fell apart in the rain, no one would buy them.
Exactly. On the rational side, they provide the functional proof of incredibly durable, highly technical outdoor gear backed by an ironclad repair guarantee. The emotion draws you in. The rational quality justifies the premium price.
Or Apple. The emotional pull is an aesthetic sense of calm, the desire for simplicity in a chaotic digital world, and the feeling of belonging to a specific creative class. But the rational reassurance is the high-end technical performance and the seamless ecosystem. You absolutely need both.
You do.
But I have to ask the obvious question here. It is incredibly easy for Nike or Apple or Patagonia to execute a dual approach. They have vast resources.
Millions of dollars.
Yeah, they can spend millions on sweeping cinematic commercials that forcefully generate an emotional response. How does a local small business, a listener who might be bootstrapping their operation from a garage, actually implement emotional design on a shoestring budget?
This is exactly why the Chutney Castle case study is included in the source material.
Yeah.
It is one of the most powerful examples of emotional branding I have ever seen, specifically because it answers that exact question of budget and scale.
Tell me about the Chutney Castle.
So, the Chutney Castle is a local charity initiative. Their mission is to reduce local food waste by taking surplus, unsold produce from markets and organizing community cooking classes to transform that produce into jams and chutneys.
So by definition, they have absolutely zero budget for massive cinematic ad campaigns.
Zero. They had to build emotional resonance entirely through their packaging design at the point of sale. And they did it using profound psychological insight rather than capital.
I want to visualize this. What did the physical product look like?
Well, if they had followed standard, functional business logic, they would have printed simple, uniform labels. The label would say strawberry jam, feature a barcode, list the ingredients, and maybe have a simple logo. That is functional.
Right. Boring, but functional.
Instead, they utilized interactive, handwritten labels. When local community members came to the cooking classes to process the donated fruit, they weren't just treated as factory labor. They were encouraged to literally name the specific batch they created, and they were asked to sign their own names on the labels of the jars they produced.
Oh, wow. That is a subtle but massive shift.
It changes everything. When those jars eventually made it to the market shelves, the label did not just communicate what was in the jar. It communicated who made it.
So a shopper wasn't just looking at a jar of jam, they were looking at Sarah's Spiced Strawberry Rescue with Sarah's actual handwriting right there on the glass.
Exactly. The designers realized that shifting the label from a functional mindset to a deeply emotional, human mindset completely transformed the customer experience.
Let's dissect the psychology of that handwritten name because it impacts two completely different groups of people. First, you had the creators, the people who actually cooked the jam.
Right. For the community members, signing their name generated an immense sense of ownership, agency, and pride. They were no longer just volunteers, they were artisans.
Yeah.
Once they named and signed their creation, they formed a powerful emotional bond with the physical product, which actively furthered the charity's core mission of reducing food waste. You do not throw away something you proudly put your name on.
And then you have the consumer, the person walking down the aisle in the market looking to buy jam. How does the handwritten label affect them?
For the consumer, that small, inexpensive design detail triggers immediate empathy. In a grocery store filled with thousands of identical, industrially churned out products, encountering a handwritten name is startling.
It breaks the pattern.
It provides immediate visual proof that the product was crafted by a human hand in their own community. It cost the charity essentially nothing extra to use a blank label and a pen, but the emotional resonance, the feeling of connection, locality, and authenticity was profound.
It is brilliant. It completely bypasses the traditional methods of building trust. The Neuroscience article we discussed earlier touched on the concept of the mere exposure effect.
Ah, yes.
Which is the psychological phenomenon where people develop a preference for something simply because they are exposed to it repeatedly over time. Like the more frequently you see a logo, the more familiar it becomes, and the more your brain trusts it.
Familiarity lowers cognitive friction at the point of purchase.
But here is the hard truth for our listener. A small business simply cannot afford to buy mere exposure.
No, you can't.
You don't have the capital to put your logo on every billboard, podcast ad, and television screen until the public is forced to become familiar with you. You have to find a shortcut to that trust.
And the Chutney Castle proves that deep emotional resonance is that shortcut. If you can trigger a genuine feeling of belonging, pride, or community safety, you can build trust in an instant, rather than waiting for the mere exposure effect to kick in over 5 years of expensive advertising.
That is the defining advantage of a small business. You substitute massive financial resources with deep surgical psychological insight. You outcare the competition.
Well said. But this naturally raises the next critical hurdle. If the goal is to lead with empathy, to build this profound emotional connection, you have to actually understand what your specific customers are feeling.
Right.
You cannot sit in an empty room staring at a whiteboard and guess what their unmet needs are. Empathy requires active, sustained listening.
Which means we have to talk about how a brand actually listens and how it uses what it hears to shape its personality. This requires us to define a term that appears constantly throughout the source material: verbal identity.
Yes.
And the sources are very quick to clarify that verbal identity is not just a clever tagline.
Oh, a tagline is merely the tip of the iceberg. Verbal identity encompasses the entire linguistic DNA of a brand.
The DNA.
It's the tone, the vocabulary, the cadence, and the distinct, recognizable personality that must be discernible in every single piece of communication.
So it's the headline on your homepage, the instructions on your packaging, the specific phrasing you use when replying to a frustrated customer on Twitter.
Yes, and even the tone of the automated email receipt someone gets at 3:00 a.m. It is the holistic voice of the company.
And according to the industry experts and strategy workbooks, developing this identity requires analyzing what they call the triad of brand language.
The triad.
It's a three-pronged approach to linguistic auditing. A business cannot just invent a voice. It has to understand the existing conversation.
What are the three prongs?
The triad consists of analyzing. First, how the broader industry generally speaks to consumers. Second, the language the brand itself is currently using. And third, the language the consumers use when talking about the industry or their problems.
Historically, capturing and analyzing consumer language at scale was incredibly difficult and expensive. You had to run focus groups or conduct massive phone surveys.
Yeah, totally out of reach for a small business.
Exactly. But today, the primary source of this raw, unfiltered data is social media chatter. Consumers are openly broadcasting exactly what they care about, what frustrates them, what delights them, and crucially, the exact vocabulary they use to describe their reality.
But because the volume of this data is so massive, small businesses must learn to leverage text analytics programs.
Right. You use software tools to scrape social media platforms, online review sites, and niche forums to pinpoint recurring keywords, common phrases, and the underlying emotional connotations present in the marketplace.
You're essentially conducting a forensic linguistic audit of your target demographic.
And the ultimate objective of this forensic audit is to identify the mismatch.
The mismatch.
You are hunting for the gap between the polished, professional language your brand is broadcasting and the messy, emotional language your consumer is actually using.
Let me try to make this concrete with a hypothetical scenario.
Let's do it.
Let's say a listener is running a small software company that sells a project management tool for creative agencies. Internally, the marketing team is very proud of the software, and they describe it using words like synergy, optimization, agile frameworks, and seamless cross-platform integration.
Very standard corporate speak.
That's their established brand language. But then they run a text analytics scrape on their users' social media chatter and the specific subreddits where creative directors hang out. The data comes back, and the users aren't talking about agile frameworks.
What are they saying?
They are using phrases like, I just want to stop dropping the ball. Managing this team is like herding cats. This software saved my sanity, and I just need a tool that gets out of my way so I can get it done.
That is a classic, massive mismatch.
Right.
And the sources explicitly state that ignoring these pre-existing linguistic associations in the market makes a brand look profoundly inauthentic, or worse, entirely out of touch.
Yeah.
Verbal identity is not a broadcast mechanism. It is a two-way dialogue. If your audience is using casual, highly emotional, outcome-focused language like saving my sanity, and your brand stubbornly continues to use stiff, feature-focused corporate jargon like seamless integration, the trust is broken before the conversation even begins.
You sound like a corporate robot attempting to talk to a stressed-out human.
You do.
But let me throw a wrench into this methodology. The triad of brand language and using text analytics to scrape reviews sounds absolutely fantastic if you were an established company that already has thousands of vocal customers tweeting about your product.
Sure.
But what if a listener is a brand new small business? What if they are launching next Tuesday? Their social media chatter is literally non-existent. It's just their mom liking their Instagram posts. How do you analyze a conversation that hasn't happened yet?
It is a very common, very frustrating hurdle for startups. But the solution is actually quite elegant. You pivot the focus of your text analytics.
Okay, pivot where?
Instead of searching for mentions of your non-existent brand, you point the software directly at the broader industry and specifically at your largest competitors' audiences. You audit the Goliath to build your David.
Okay, walk me through how that works in practice.
You analyze the massive volume of chatter surrounding the biggest, most established players in your space. You read their negative reviews. You scrape the forums where their users complain. What you are looking for are the gaps.
The unmet needs.
Yes, you are looking for places where consumers are expressing an unmet emotional need or showing profound frustration with the standard jargon the industry giants use.
Oh, I see.
If every major competitor in your space is communicating with cold, clinical, highly technical language, and the text analytics reveal that consumers in the forums are desperately asking for warmth, human guidance, and simplicity, you have just found your unique verbal identity.
You don't just copy what the consumer says. You shape your entire brand voice to fill the exact void the competitors are ignoring. You adopt the underlying emotion of the frustrated consumer and reflect it back to them as the solution.
Precisely. You validate their feelings by adopting a language that proves you actually listen to them.
Okay, so let's take inventory here. We have hacked the neuroscience of our name to ensure it encodes in the brain. We have found the emotional core of our offering, leading with empathy rather than mere exposure.
Yes.
We have scraped the social chatter to find the exact vocabulary our audience is using, and we've pinpointed our tone. We know exactly what we want to say and how we want to sound.
Oh, perfect.
But a pile of linguistic data and a list of empathetic vocabulary words does not equal a brand.
No, it doesn't.
If you just hand that to a graphic designer or a social media manager, it will devolve into a mess. We need a structure to hold it all together.
Which brings us to the next critical phase, structuring the message through narrative models and brand kits. Having a voice is only half the battle. You need a framework to deliver that voice consistently.
And visual guardrails to ensure the aesthetic presentation doesn't contradict the verbal message.
Exactly. The concept of narrative models was touched on in several of the sources, noting that the strongest verbal identities are almost always anchored in a recognizable narrative structure.
Because human beings are fundamentally storytelling creatures.
We are. We naturally, instinctively frame our daily experiences, our challenges, and our purchases in the context of recognizable stories. It is how we make sense of a chaotic world. We assign roles to the people and the products we interact with.
So a successful brand must proactively audit its own history, its mission statement, and the social data it just collected to determine its optimum narrative model.
Right. Are you the rebel, challenging the bloated, expensive status quo of your industry? Are you the sage, offering calm wisdom and expert guidance to an overwhelmed consumer? Are you the everyman, providing reliable, no-nonsense comfort?
It feels exactly like picking the genre of a movie. You have to know what kind of story you're telling before you start writing the dialogue.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Because if you are selling a cozy, feel-good romantic comedy, you cannot cut a trailer using the booming dramatic voiceover from a high-stakes action movie. It creates intense cognitive dissonance. the audience gets confused.
They absolutely do.
Applying this to our earlier hypothetical, if your text analytics data reveals that your customers are stressed out and desperately want a helpful guide narrative like the Sage, then your typography, your color palette, and your copywriting tone cannot be screaming aggressive, disruptive rebel.
The alignment must be absolute. And the fascinating thing about narrative models is that sometimes simply changing the narrative genre without altering the physical product in any way can completely revitalize a struggling brand. If you change the story the consumer tells themselves about your product, you fundamentally change the perceived value of that product. But to ensure that specific story is told consistently across a website, a billboard, and a social media feed, you must build a brand kit.
The university lesson plan from Dartmouth outlines this process beautifully, calling it moving from chaos to cohesion. A brand kit is the foundational internal document that officially connects aesthetic judgments to your strategic narrative goals.
And it is important to note that a brand kit is not just a simple PDF listing your hex codes and font names.
Right, it's not a mood board.
It is the absolute law of the land for your brand's identity. The core elements of a comprehensive brand kit dictate far more than the logo. It establishes strict rules for typography, primary and secondary color palettes, the use of shapes and dimensions in photography, and crucially, it houses the voice and tone guidelines we just developed.
The most vital takeaway from the Dartmouth material is understanding that a brand kit is a highly strategic tool. The sources make a profound statement about this relationship. They argue that the visual identity is essentially the body language of the verbal voice.
It is a perfect metaphor. Think about human interaction. If someone is speaking to you with warm, empathetic, conversational words, but their body language is rigid, their arms are crossed, and they're glaring at you.
You don't trust the words.
Exactly. The body language contradicts the voice, and brands do this all the time.
Oh, yeah. If your text analytics led you to develop a verbal identity that is accessible, friendly, and conversational, but your brand kit dictates the use of a harsh, jagged, hyper-modern typography paired with a stark, neon color palette,
the visual body language is aggressively contradicting the verbal voice.
the consumer feels a subconscious unease, even if they can't articulate exactly why they don't trust the website.
To illustrate the stakes of this alignment, the Dartmouth lesson plan highlights an incredible contrast using case studies of success and failure. They dissect the infamous Gap logo redesign as a cautionary tale of visual chaos.
Oh, I remember this. For listeners who might not remember or who missed it, Gap, the classic American clothing retailer, suddenly and seemingly without warning changed their iconic, tall, serif font blue box logo.
Yes.
They replaced it with an incredibly generic, bland sans serif font, accompanied by a tiny floating blue gradient square. The public backlash was not just negative, it was immediate, visceral, and intense.
People were furious.
Consumers actively mocked it. The outrage was so severe that Gap capitulated and reverted to their original logo within a matter of days. Millions of dollars wasted.
It is taught in business schools for a reason. The core failure was not simply that the new logo was ugly in a subjective sense. The failure was that Gap changed their visual identity, their body language, without any strategic alignment to their established narrative model.
It was chaos. Gap's narrative model for decades was the reliable, classic American staple, the everyman.
Right.
But the new logo looked like the branding for an obscure 2010 tech startup. It severed the emotional connection because the visual cues no longer supported the story the consumer expected. They broke the trust by radically changing their body language without changing their voice.
Now contrast that catastrophic failure of alignment with the highly cohesive strategy of IKEA, which is also detailed in the sources.
What did IKEA do?
IKEA ran a brilliant campaign where they painstakingly recreated famous, instantly recognizable living rooms from pop culture, like the Simpsons animated living room or Monica's eclectic apartment from the show Friends.
I remember seeing those ads. They were incredibly striking.
But they were striking because they were built entirely using standard IKEA furniture. Why did that campaign resonate so powerfully while the Gap redesign failed? It all comes down to the narrative model.
IKEA's established narrative model is the creator, or the everyman, right?
Exactly. Their entire brand promise is that they provide practical, affordable, modular furnishings so that you can build the life you want.
So by recreating iconic pop culture sets, they were using highly creative storytelling that perfectly fit their strategic goals. They were proving that the furniture was so versatile it could build any life, even a fictional one.
Exactly. And crucially, they didn't alter their core identity to do it. They didn't change their iconic blue and yellow logo. They didn't adopt a trendy new font. They utilized their strictly established brand kit to tell a clever, highly engaging story that validated their verbal identity. It was the epitome of cohesion.
It really proves the old adage that limitations breed creativity.
They really do.
When a small business owner takes the time to build a rigorous brand kit, when your colors, your fonts, and your narrative genre are locked in, you no longer have to waste mental energy reinventing the wheel every single time you need to post on Instagram or design a flyer. You just play within the sandbox you have already constructed.
It removes the paralysis of choice. It moves a team away from subjective, endless debates like, I don't know, I think this shade of green looks nicer today, and forces strategic decision-making. Does this shade of green actively support our narrative model of the sage?
It empowers business owners to execute quickly, confidently, and consistently.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at the machine we have built. We have the neuroscience-backed name, we have the empathetic core, we have the data-driven vocabulary derived from social chatter, we have chosen our narrative structure, and we have locked down the visual body language in a cohesive brand kit.
It's a solid foundation.
On paper, we have the perfect brand identity. But a blueprint is not a building, and a machine does not run itself. This brings us to the final and arguably most difficult challenge detailed in our sources: delivering the voice.
The execution.
How do you align your internal company culture to execute this vision, especially as you begin to scale? Because a brand voice is completely worthless if the people actually working inside the company refuse to use it.
Execution is where most theoretical branding falls apart. The materials emphasize that verbal identity must be consistent across every conceivable channel. And the fatal flaw many businesses make is assuming that channels only refers to external marketing. True consistency mandates that the internal language of the company must align perfectly with the external promises being made to the consumer.
We are talking about the unseen machinery of the business: internal memos, company-wide briefs, the scripts the sales team uses, recruitment drives, and HR policies.
Every internal touch point.
Because if your external marketing is beautifully crafted to promise a warm, quirky, deeply empathetic relationship, but your internal company culture is a cutthroat, corporate, jargon-filled nightmare where employees are treated like metrics, the brand is essentially a lie.
And it is a lie that the consumer will eventually uncover. They will feel the disconnect the very first time they have a problem and have to call your customer service department. The sources dedicate significant time to the concept of emotional intelligence inside the brand. The premise is simple but profound. Internal culture dictates external impact.
You can have the most polished, beautifully designed external brand in the world. You can have the perfect font and the perfect color palette. But all of that feels instantly hollow, almost offensively hypocritical if the customer service representative answering the phone lacks emotional intelligence and empathy.
This is why staff must be actively trained. But they cannot just be trained to read a script. They must be trained to recognize the emotional state of the customer and communicate utilizing the brand's established empathy.
I want to play devil's advocate here because this sounds like a very fine line to walk.
Okay.
If a business owner enforces a strict verbal identity internally, doesn't that run the risk of turning employees into corporate robots?
It's a valid concern.
We've all experienced that forced artificial cheerfulness, forcing the cashier to say, "Have a magical day," to every single person, regardless of the context. Where is the boundary between maintaining a cohesive, consistent brand voice and essentially brainwashing your staff to speak in catchphrases?
That is a very real danger, and it occurs when leadership fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of a brand kit. A verbal identity is not a rigid script of corporate buzzwords that employees are forced to memorize under threat of termination.
Then what is it?
It is meant to be a shared understanding of the company's core values and emotional objectives.
How does that look in practice?
When a staff member truly understands the why behind the brand voice, when they understand why the company prioritizes empathy and what specific anxieties the customer is likely experiencing, they begin to use the voice naturally.
Because it aligns with the actual culture.
Exactly. It aligns with a genuine company culture. You do not hand an employee a script. You hand them an emotional goal. You say, your objective in this interaction is to make the customer feel safe and heard. And then you allow the employee to use their own genuine humanity, their own personality, to reach that goal while staying within the broad guardrails of the brand kit.
That is a crucial distinction. You give them the emotional goal, not the script. That empowers the employee to actually be empathetic rather than restricting them to a robotic, pre-approved sentence.
Exactly.
Consistency is the ultimate proof of brand authenticity, but that consistency has to originate from a real place internally. Now, as a small business grows, and particularly as it leverages digital platforms to cross borders and reach diverse regional markets, it encounters a massive scaling problem. The sources refer to this as the global dilemma,
Global versus local.
the tension between standardization and adaptation.
It is one of the most complex challenges in brand management. When you expand, do you standardize your brand elements globally to save money, maintain efficiency, and present a rigid, unified image to the world?
Or do you adapt your brand locally to ensure deep cultural relevance, knowing that you risk diluting the core identity that made you successful in the first place?
To illustrate this tension, the Business Knowledge article provides a perfect hypothetical scenario, which they call the Burger Bliss dilemma.
Oh, this was a great example. It perfectly encapsulates the stakes.
Walk us through it.
Imagine you own a highly successful fast food chain called Burger Bliss. Your core identity, the thing that made you famous, is a specific, standardized beef burger with a proprietary special sauce. Your brand is growing, and you decide to open your first international location in a massive new market, let's say India.
Okay.
The dilemma is this. Do you serve the exact same beef burger with the exact same sauce, operating under the assumption that your global standardized appeal is strong enough to win out?
If you choose strict standardization in that scenario, you face catastrophic failure. By serving beef, you risk profoundly alienating a massive portion of the local market whose dietary and cultural practices forbid it. You render your brand not just irrelevant, but potentially offensive.
That is the inherent danger of arrogant overstandardization.
Right.
So a logical business owner looks at that risk and swings to the opposite extreme. Adaptation. You decide to change the menu completely. You strip the beef burger and offer entirely vegetarian options formulated with local spices.
You gain local acceptance.
But it raises an existential question for the brand. If you remove the core product, does it even feel like Burger Bliss anymore? Have you adapted so much and strayed so far from your brand kit that you've diluted the global identity into nothing?
It is an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk. The sources argue that the most successful, resilient brands in the world execute a true global strategy. They think globally, but act locally.
How do they do both?
They identify and fiercely protect the absolute core values and visual identity of the brand, standardizing those elements everywhere. But they heavily adapt the execution and the communication of those values to fit the local context.
And the ultimate masterclass in this local execution, according to the text, is Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola is the undisputed gold standard for this approach.
Yeah.
Look at what they standardize. The iconic red and white color palette, the unique